This ret guide is going to go fairly fast and will be largely split into a few parts. First, the build and what you need, what you can expect, what you should do, and then we'll go through more in-depth explanations on decision making. Be sure to check out the video chapters if you're looking for a certain thing. Starting off with talents. If you're not a fan of active talents and needing more keybinds, you are in great luck. This patch, Rep Paladins quite literally take every single passive talent and they have almost no pressure at all to change talents ever, despite what type of content you're doing. Besides the utility rows, you just hug the left super hard. The level 25 and 45 rows are free reign, although I recommend Healing Hands over Selfless Healer for ease of use, and Fist of Justice for the same reason. Although Blinding Light is good, it's another button, so it's really up to you. In the 45 row though, don't take Justicar's Vengeance. As a matter of fact, I've never even said its name before right now. It's terrible. And you can also take Cavalier if you need a second horse, but it's at the cost of major defensive CDR. And you will be exclusively using Kyrian Mechanicos, using this path here with these conduits socketed, and similar to your talents, you are never expected to swap off of Mechanicos. However, if you are ever in pure single target, use this configuration instead. Now this guide is only going to talk about Mythic Plus, which is never pure single target, but I figured since most things are unchanged in all situations, I may as well mention the little things that do change. Moving on to Legendaries, of course you'll be wearing Unity, and your second Legendary will be Tempest of the Lightbringer in all keys. Just like I said with the Soulbind, you will never change this unless you are doing pure single target. Again, not in keys. But if you do want to build pure single target, you would instead make Final Verdict. But this is the last time I promised in the entire video that I will mention pure single target. With regards to what stats, you can pretty much go Haste Mastery, Verse Mastery, or even Haste First to be honest. Just sim yourself and figure it out. Make them in whatever slot you want, just make sure it does not conflict with you having your tier bonus. And this is the last I'll mention gearing and stats in this video. Sim yourself to determine what are your upgrades. I promise you, while the sims do have their limitations, they are the closest thing you will get to the absolute truth when it comes to gearing and stats. That pretty much concludes it for the build. Ret does not have any special consumables or fancy enchants, just the usual stuff. So let's talk about how the class feels to play. Firstly, you are melee, but you're not what I would call a true melee. While of course you want to be as close as possible to what you're hitting, you are not punished when you have to move away for brief moments to dodge mechanics. Your damage is also very front-loaded to a pack. What that means is you will get up to your stable DPS number very quickly in a pull, but a few seconds into the pull you will stop rising and effectively plateau. And if the pull goes beyond 20 to 30 seconds, your damage starts to go down. But because you're so front-loaded with damage and you have no way to misdirect threat, you will find yourself pulling threat and dying a lot, which means you effectively just have to hang out and wait a few seconds every pull before you can participate. The result of this is that on very low keys, where waiting a few seconds basically means you miss half the pack, you will perform poorly. But as the packs start living longer, you'll find yourself doing better overall damage. Another note about playing Ret is that you are very much a throughput first class. What that means is you are basically the exact inverse of a rogue, wherein they can bring throughput, but they are more brought for their utility. You don't really work like that. Retribution both offensively and defensively is just throughput. All of your damaging spells pretty much just deal damage and not much more than that, and your defensive options are either immunities or absorbs, which prevent throughput intake, or they just simply heal. So if you are in the business of just closing your eyes and dealing damage without much more responsibility, you have chosen the right spec. Looking at your damage breakdown, as you can see, Divine Storm will carry your damage profile heavily, and you'll notice a second Divine Storm on your meters. That's your legendary, and it basically ends there. All it does is add 20% storm damage and it shoots it forward. Just careful not to pull packs with it. Now the rest of the breakdown isn't as important, and I'll explain why. Your goal as Ret is quite simple, given that all your talents are passive and you have no major legendary or covenant interactions. Your goal is simply to build holy power and spend, and that's quite literally the entire class. Your pitfalls and the nuance will come with managing holy power, such as correctly and efficiently building holy power and knowing when to spend at exactly 3 versus building up higher. You only have 3 spenders as Ret, and they interact in no way, shape, or form at all. You have Templars, which is only used on pure single target, Divine Storm, which is used when there are 2 or more targets stacked, and then you have Word of Glory, which just heals. Looking at a pull here, again, the rotation of Rep Pally is extremely simple, especially when being explained. I enter the pull at 0 holy power, and my goal is to simply build and spend while not overcapping, as best as I can. And I'm picking the best generators of holy power first, while ignoring lower efficiency generators. That's why if you look at my spell cooldowns here, you'll see Crusader Strike and even Judgment sometimes will stay off cooldown, and basically just get wasted in exchange for using bigger generators like Blade of Wrath and Wake of Ashes. This is one of the few classes in the game I'd say that's properly and wholly explained by a simple ability priority list, so let's break it down. Your goal is to build efficiently and spend. These are your 3 spenders and these are your 6 generators, and these are how much holy power they each generate. Just based on this, you can single out Crusader Strike, Judgment, and Hammer of Wrath. Crusader Strike is one of your only true melee abilities, and it does quite literally nothing except deal damage and give you a holy power. So that drops it to the bottom of the priority in all circumstances. Judgment is much easier to use and is ranged. It also makes the target you hit it with take 25% more damage from your next spender. Hammer of Wrath, which is your execute style ability, only usable on targets under 20% HP, and this is your top single holy power generator just by merit of it doing more damage than the others. Next are the elite multi-holy power generators, Blade of Wrath and Wake of Ashes. Now I think it goes without saying that one generates 3 holy power and one generates 2. So naturally Wake of Ashes will go ahead of Blade of Wrath, easy enough. Now Blade of Wrath is absolutely ranged at 12 yards, however, Wake of Ashes is ranged, but it's also not. And what I mean by that is that it's a 12-yard cone in front of you. So if you're fighting one mob, sure, you can call it ranged. But if you're fighting an entire pack and you cast Wake before being up against the first mob, it may not hit the last one, so just keep that in mind. Also, if you're side strafing and you Wake of Ashes, the animation desyncs pretty heavily from where it actually hits, so you will hit what's in front of you always, but it just looks like you missed a lot of the time. And very lastly, as a footnote, you have Consecrate. Now, if you have good RNG, you will never end up pressing this button. However, if everything else in your kit is exhausted and you're left waiting, you can press Consecrate. At best, throughout an entire key, it'll do maybe half to 1% of your entire damage. And if you just want to press Consecrate because it looks cool, that's totally acceptable. When it comes to your cooldown usage, you have Wings, aka Avenging Wrath, but no shot I ever call it that, and Divine Toll. In a dungeon, Divine Toll has effectively a 45-second cooldown. Now it'll be as low as 40 or as high as 55, but what that means is it falls under my rule of 1-minute CDs, which is that if it's up, press it. Divine Toll will give you 1 holy power per target in range, and then up to 3 more from this conduit. This will overcap you on holy power almost every single time. Then Unity will make Divine Toll fire off a judgment every few seconds on your current target. This will also give you holy power and apply Judgment's debuff. At the start, ignore this, just let it happen. Later on, when you get comfortable with the class, you can look to the holy power and targeting of this legendary as a way you can squeeze out a little more extra damage and even some priority damage. But I don't want new players sitting and waiting for that judgment every 5 seconds, so just please ignore it and then come back later when you're trying to further optimize the class. Then you have Wings. Now this is a 2-minute cooldown that's off the GCD and basically just makes you do more damage without changing anything rotation wise, except giving you Hammer of Wrath. This talent makes you explode violently when you spend holy power in Wings, but that's about it. This is your burst, it lasts 20 seconds, so don't press it if the pack is dying in the next couple of seconds, but also don't be cringe and save it for 5 minutes to get one big burst. That's never going to be worth. The last key thing I will dive into is a few important procs you have that affect your gameplay. Art of War, a proc that's off melee swings, so it's purely passive, and it will randomly reset the cooldown of your Blade of Wrath. And lucky for you, your entire tier set revolves around this. So sometimes it will reset Wake of Ashes instead, and to top it off, when you do get an Art of War reset, either Blade of Wrath or Wake of Ashes, you gain Seraphim. It's actually a talent. Blizzard doesn't really know that it's a talent, so that's why they put it in the tier. It's extremely passive, and you just want to make sure you use Wake of Ashes and Blade of Wrath quickly as to not have a proc deleted, because if they are off cooldown, the proc will not give you another charge. It will just give you Seraphim. Oh, and what does Seraphim do? It just gives you stats. It makes numbers bigger, and that's it. I'll reiterate once more that your performance as a Retribution Paladin will live and die on how well you can manage the priority list. Art of War and the tier set are making it even easier as they give you back your highest priority abilities, and there are no dots, there are no debuffs to maintain, and most of your judgment damage even is just from Divine Toll. Now to the part that if you were only here to deal damage, you can leave. Now Ret doesn't have a lot of utility though, so it's important to use what you have well, to not only complete the key, but to leave a good lasting impression on group members. Ret often has terrible community perception, so when you do get into a consistent group, you kinda want to stay. Your utility is very simple, so this will be fast. You just have to take this information and be proactive with it in keys. Word of Glory is your spender for healing. If you're dying, Word of Glory yourself. It's obviously a DPS loss because it's 3 holy power, but so is being dead on the ground. Also, your healing potential with Word of Glory and Healing Hands Talented is insane. You can heal most, if not all, content around the plus 15 level without a healer, which means that if your healer does die or DCs one way or another, you might be the new designated healer until they return. Lay on Hands is just Word of Glory, but you just didn't feel like spending holy power. Bubble has simple usage, use it when you're about to die so you don't, but it is a true immunity so you can remove debuffs on you and you can negate a lot of mechanics with it. Same with Bop, it's just an external and it's just physical, so it'll negate physical hits and cleanse physical debuffs, and it can also still be used to mitigate a lot of mechanics. Just don't pop the tank or the group is dead. Shield Defense is also very simple. It's an absorb. The more you absorb, the more damage it deals. Now, if you know you won't die, you can use this to stay into mechanics so that you can keep dealing damage, and then the damage that it absorbs will deal even more damage. However, this strat might get you killed, so if you're scared, just use it as you would any other absorb. Finally, you have Blessing of Freedom as your last defensive in this lineup. It removes slows and roots and makes you immune to them. And now there's a lot of uses for it, but here is the best one throughout Shadowlands. The last boss in Necrotic Wake will root a player, then when the root is removed, you pulse damage and root everyone else near you. Now if you are able to, you have to be fast, look for when the boss is casting, and look to see who it's casting the root on. Then you pre-freedom the person before the root hits and the mechanic just won't happen. You can hit every single one of these on this fight, but the timing is going to be very tight, so you have to be kind of slick. Also look out for any other mechanics that either have a slow component or a root component. Freedom might just negate it entirely if you precast it, and it can also cleanse most, if not all, slow mechanics in the entire game. And you have two true utility buttons. Hammer is just a stun, it doesn't need much explaining. And Turn Evil is a fear, but it's only usable on undeads, aberrations, and demons. This can situationally clutch, but for the most part, if you use this without proper consideration, you may end up making the situation worse, as the mob just runs around in fear. So you can Turn Evil a mob, and then it can turn around and run towards you while still being under the effects of Turn Evil. And lastly, you have Blinding Light if you talent into it. Just use this like an AoE interrupt. It will stop the cast of certain small mobs, but the Disorient itself will almost break immediately. But yeah, that's basically it for Rep Paladin. Good luck, and as always, I'm happy to answer any questions in the comments.